In this video, we're going to go over the history of the Game Boy and how it was a vital part of the gaming console wars.
All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable.
Now the games are as colorful as you.
In 1989, Nintendo released a small gray brick that would revolutionize how people played video games. The Game Boy, designed by Gunpei Yokoi and his team at Nintendo Research and Development 1, brought console-quality gaming out of the living room and into players' hands, pockets, and lives. While not the first portable gaming device, Nintendo's own Game & Watch preceded it. The Game Boy was the first truly successful handheld console with interchangeable game cartridges, creating a legacy that would span multiple decades and sell over 118 million units worldwide. The origins of the Game Boy trace back to Nintendo's internal R&D 1 division headed by Gunpei Yokoi, one of Nintendo's most innovative employees. Yokoi, who had already created the successful Game & Watch series and produced titles like Metroid and Kid Icarus, embraced a design philosophy he called lateral thinking with withered technology, using mature, affordable components in innovative ways rather than cutting-edge technology. This approach would become fundamental to the Game Boy's success. Early in the process, a significant disagreement arose between Yokoi and assistant director Satoru Okada. Yokoi initially envisioned a simple device, similar to an advanced Game & Watch, while Okada pushed for a more powerful system with interchangeable cartridges, essentially a portable Nintendo Entertainment System. Despite heated meetings and tension, Okada's vision ultimately prevailed, with Yokoi eventually embracing the direction. The project earned the codename Dot Matrix Game, referring to its display technology. This was a significant departure from the Game & Watch, which used pre-printed LCD screens that limited each unit to a single game. The Game Boy's dot matrix display allowed for dynamic, changeable graphics, enabling a library of different games on a single device. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi encouraged the project, but many within the company remained skeptical. Some employees even mockingly referred to it as Dame Game, Dame meaning hopeless in Japanese. The team faced numerous technical challenges, including securing key components. Sharp Corporation initially showed reluctance to provide LCD technology, but ultimately agreed after seeing a Game Boy mock-up. When Sharp first proposed a twisted pneumatic display, Yamauchi rejected it as too difficult to see, leading to the adoption of the super twisted pneumatic technology, which offered better viewing angles and contrast. For the original Game Boy's 1989 launch, Nintendo invested $10 million in marketing, an unusually large sum for the typically frugal company. According to Don Coiner, marketing manager at Nintendo of America, President Minoru Arakawa wanted to turn up the heat and deliberately create an environment of scarcity. The strategy aimed to generate just enough demand that consumers might need to visit multiple stores to find a unit, creating excitement without excessive frustration. Nintendo's TV ads were mainly aimed at young boys, but they were designed to also catch the attention of older teens to make the product feel cooler and more desirable. As Coiner explained, pretty much everything we did was targeted to 9 to 14-year-old boys, but we tried to make it appeal to 15 to 16-year-olds because you want to be aspirational. The strategy played on the idea that younger kids often look up to and want what older ones have. The television commercials faced unique challenges due to the Game Boy's non-backlit screen. It was always hard to shoot TV commercials, Coiner noted, because without the backlit screen, we had to light it. This technical limitation led to a distinctive rapid cutting style with brief gameplay snippets, edgy voiceovers, and dramatic shots of the Game Boy from various angles rather than direct frontal views of gameplay. Resource constraints shaped the final product. The team initially considered using a Ricoh-manufactured CPU similar to the NES, but due to ongoing development of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, they opted for a less powerful Sharp CPU. To reduce costs, they decreased the screen size, though it was too late in development to reduce the console's overall dimensions accordingly. When unveiled in 1987, the Game Boy featured another innovation pioneered by Yokoi: the directional control pad, or D-pad. Recognizing that traditional joysticks would compromise portability, Yokoi designed this flat controller that extended just slightly beyond the casing, allowing for precise directional control while maintaining a compact form factor. Similar to the layout of the NES controller, this design made it easier for players to transition between home and handheld gaming. The original Game Boy launched in Japan on April 21, 1989, and quickly sold through its entire initial stock of 300,000 units within 2 weeks. North America received the system on July 31, 1989, selling 40,000 units on its first day. Europe would follow in September 1990. Approximately 95% of Nintendo's marketing budget went to television advertising, with the remainder split between Nintendo Power Magazine initiatives and in-store demo kiosks. These hands-on demonstrations proved particularly effective for the Game Boy, allowing potential customers to experience the system firsthand. The Game Boy's technical specifications were modest even by 1989 standards. It featured a custom system-on-chip manufactured by Sharp, called the DMG CPU by Nintendo, and the LR35902 by Sharp. The main processor was a hybrid of the Intel 8080 and Zilog Z80 processors running at 4.19 MHz. The display was a 2.5-inch reflective STN monochrome LCD with a resolution of 160 by 144 pixels that could render 4 shades of greenish-gray. For controls, the Game Boy featured a D-pad, 4 buttons labeled A, B, Select, and Start, plus a power switch with a cartridge lock to prevent accidental removal during play. Volume and contrast were adjusted via dials on the sides. The system was powered by 4 AA batteries, providing approximately 15 hours of gameplay. For extended sessions, users could connect an optional AC adapter or rechargeable battery pack through a power port on the left side. The Game Boy launched in North America at $89.95, a price significantly lower than its competitors. This affordability, combined with its impressive battery life and compact design, gave it a major edge over technically superior but more expensive rivals. Competitors tried to challenge the Game Boy's dominance with more advanced hardware.
If you were colorblind and had an IQ less than 12, then you wouldn't care which portable you had. Of course, you wouldn't care if you drank from the toilet either.
Sega's Game Gear, released in 1990, featured a color screen and hardware based on the Master System, but its higher price and poor battery life limited its appeal. The Atari Lynx, designed by former Amiga developers R.J. McCall and Dave Needle, boasted impressive hardware scaling and a large full-color screen, but suffered from similar battery issues and a bulky form factor. NEC's Turbo Express, capable of playing TurboGrafx 16 games on the go, was even more powerful but prohibitively expensive at $249.99. Ultimately, none of these systems could compete with the Game Boy's winning combination of affordability, battery life, and an ever-growing game library. What truly cemented the Game Boy's place in gaming history was its approach to games. Nintendo's philosophy centered on the belief that a gaming system's appeal was primarily determined by its game library. R&D1 developed Super Mario Land, adapting the Super Mario Bros. Formula to the handheld format, with intentions of making it the flagship launch title. However, the ultimate pack-in game would come from an unexpected source. Hank Rogers brought a Soviet-made puzzle game called Tetris to Nintendo of America's attention. Despite its simple graphics and lack of a recognized brand, Tetris's suitability for on-the-go gaming convinced Nintendo president Minoru Arakawa to bundle it with the Game Boy in all regions except Japan. Rogers promised Arakawa that Tetris could reach a mass audience unlike anything Nintendo had seen before, transcending language, culture, age, and gender barriers. Choosing to include Tetris was a genius move. Its addictive block-stacking gameplay became inseparable from the Game Boy experience.
You need a Tetris shot.
Tetris.
Have you been Tetrisized?
Square, rectangle, trapezoid, tetrazoid.
The game's accessibility meant that anyone could pick it up and understand the mechanics within minutes. Yet its difficulty curve ensured long-term engagement. Tetris would go on to sell over 35 million copies, becoming the best-selling single Game Boy release. Despite criticisms of its monochrome display compared to the color screens of competitors, the Game Boy's practical advantages won out. As Yokoi had predicted with his withered technology philosophy, the Game Boy's technical limitations became strengths. The simple display consumed far less power, allowing for longer play sessions and reinforcing the system's identity as a truly portable gaming device. The Game Boy's success wasn't just about the hardware. Its game library expanded rapidly with titles that defined the system. Beyond Tetris and Super Mario Land, early standouts included baseball, tennis, and alleyway. Nintendo's focus on ensuring quality third-party development tools, learning from mistakes made during the NES launch, ensured a steady stream of games that kept the system relevant for years. The system's ability to connect with other devices was a game-changer for its time. Satoru Okada had previously worked on computer Mahjong Yakuman, which allowed cable communication between devices. Despite concerns from the team that this feature might be too complicated and a waste of resources, Okada personally developed the Game Link cable technology. This two-player connection would later enable the battle and trade features in the Pokémon series, adding a whole new social element to portable gaming. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, released in '93, demonstrated that the Game Boy could deliver console-quality experiences in a portable format. This beloved entry in the Zelda series balanced combat, exploration, and puzzle-solving while telling a strange, surrealist story inspired by Twin Peaks. This masterpiece sold over 3.8 million copies in its original monochrome form. In 1994, Nintendo released the Super Game Boy, an adapter that allowed Game Boy cartridges to be played on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. This peripheral displayed Game Boy games on television with limited color enhancements and debuted alongside a reimagined version of Donkey Kong that significantly expanded upon the 1981 arcade original. The Super Game Boy added 101 pre-programmed color palettes and allowed games specially designed for the device to access additional features like custom borders and sound effects. By 1995, the Game Boy was experiencing strong sales but was showing its age in a rapidly evolving market. Nintendo, unwilling to abandon its successful handheld, embarked on a series of improvements to keep the console relevant. The first revision came on March 20, 1995, with the Play It Loud campaign, known as Game Boy Bros in Japan, introducing special edition Game Boy models with colored cases. Available in red, yellow, green, blue, black, white, and clear transparent versions, these models featured darker screen borders than the original, but were otherwise identical internally. A more significant update arrived in July 1996 with the Game Boy Pocket. This slimmed-down version required just 2 AAA batteries rather than 4 AA's, though at the expense of reduced battery life, approximately 10 hours compared to the original's 15. The screen technology saw a major improvement with the introduction of a film-compensated super-twisted pneumatic LCD that significantly reduced ghosting and produced true black and white display, rather than the greenish tint of the original. The Pocket also introduced a smaller Game Link cable port, a design that would be used in all subsequent Game Boy models. Internally, the Game Boy Pocket featured a new system-on-chip, the Nintendo CPU MGB, an improved version of the original DMG CPU. The Game Boy Pocket gave hardware sales a much-needed boost, launching at the perfect time alongside Pokémon's debut in 1996. The monster-collecting RPG would become a cultural phenomenon, breathing new life into the Game Boy platform. A lot of people loved the Pocket's smaller size and better screen, but not everyone was impressed. The Los Angeles Times, for example, called it just a rebranded version of the same old black and white tech. Initially released only in silver without a power indicator LED, a 1997 revision added this feature along with new color options and reduced the price from $69.99 to $54.95. By mid-1998, the price had dropped further to $49.95 as Nintendo prepared for its next iteration. 1996 marked a pivotal year for the Game Boy with the introduction of Pokémon in Japan. Pokémon took advantage of the Game Link cable in an unprecedented way, emphasizing social interaction through trading and battling pocket monsters between devices. This social element transformed the Game Boy from a solitary entertainment device into a facilitator of real-world connections and communities. The series' formula of collecting, training, and battling creatures captured the imagination of players worldwide, becoming a cultural touchstone that would eventually grow into the highest-grossing media franchise of all time. The Pokémon franchise became the Game Boy's killer game, with red, blue, and yellow versions selling over 46 million copies combined. Tetris remained the best-selling single game with more than 35 million copies, benefiting from its status as a pack-in title with many systems. Other significant franchises that found success on the platform included Kirby, which debuted in 1992 with Kirby's Dream Land. In April 1998, Japan received the Game Boy Light, a slightly larger version of the Pocket featuring an electroluminescent backlight, the first backlit screen in the Game Boy line. Running on 2 AA batteries, it offered approximately 12 hours of gameplay, with the backlight on and 20 hours with it off. Available in gold and silver, the Game Boy Light remained exclusive to Japan, making it one of the rarest Game Boy models among collectors today. Later that year, Nintendo took a bigger leap with the Game Boy Color, the first major hardware upgrade in the Game Boy family.
Everybody's got a colorful side. Here's ours.
While it kept the same screen resolution, it expanded from 4 shades of gray to a 15-bit color palette of 32,768 colors, displaying up to 56 colors at once. It could even add preset color palettes to original Game Boy games, giving older titles a fresh look. Under the hood, it featured an 8-bit Sharp CPU running twice as fast as the original Game Boy and had triple the memory, all while maintaining full backward compatibility. At just $69.99, the Game Boy Color delivered a substantial upgrade without breaking the bank. It launched in a variety of vibrant colors, with the transparent purple model becoming a fan favorite. With Pokémon Gold and Silver versions releasing shortly after the system's launch, the Game Boy Color enjoyed immediate success, selling over 44 million units during its relatively short lifespan. Third-party support was stronger than ever, with companies like Enix releasing Dragon Warrior Monsters, Konami squeezing an impressive port of Metal Gear Solid onto the tiny screen, and card game adaptations like Yu-Gi-Oh! Finding commercial success. The Game Boy's software library continued to expand. With over 1,000 games released excluding canceled and unlicensed titles, plus more than 300 backward-compatible Game Boy Color games, players had a wealth of options. The Game Boy cartridges, called Game Packs, initially had 32 kilobytes of ROM due to the 8-bit system architecture's limitations. However, Nintendo overcame this constraint with memory bank controllers inside the cartridges, allowing games to use up to 1 megabyte of ROM. Some cartridges included additional features like battery-backed RAM for save states, real-time clock chips for time tracking, and even Rumble Pack functionality for haptic feedback. The Game Boy Color's reign was relatively brief, as Nintendo was already planning its successor. In March 2001, the Game Boy Advance arrived with a complete redesign. Switching from portrait to landscape orientation, the GBA featured a wider 2.9-inch color LCD screen and a 32-bit ARM processor, making it significantly more powerful than previous Game Boy models. The system was fully backward compatible with all Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, though their cartridges stuck out slightly while in use. Priced at $99.99 at launch, the Game Boy Advance was positioned as an affordable yet powerful portable gaming solution. Launch titles included Super Mario Advance, a remake of Super Mario Bros. 2, and F-Zero Maximum Velocity, with Nintendo promising 60 new games in 2001 alone. With its wider screen and new shoulder buttons, the Game Boy Advance opened the door for more complex gameplay. But all that innovation didn't mean much when you could barely see the screen. Sega and Atari had figured out backlit displays over a decade earlier, yet Nintendo still refused to add one, almost like they just didn't care. But there was a lot of excitement for the hardware, and it's all because of the games. Classic franchises like Castlevania found new life on the system with titles such as Circle of the Moon and Aria of Sorrow. After 8 years, Metroid made a comeback with Metroid Fusion, and Nintendo brought back classic 2D Mario platforming with the Super Mario Advance series. By June 2010, the Game Boy Advance had sold 81.5 million units worldwide. In 2003, Nintendo finally listened to the biggest complaint about the Game Boy Advance and dropped the Game Boy Advance SP. This sleek update had a clamshell design, kind of like a mini laptop, keeping the screen safe when closed and making it way more portable. More importantly, it added a front-lit screen, later upgraded to a backlit version, finally fixing the visibility issues that had plagued previous models. It came with a rechargeable lithium-ion battery, so no more hunting for double A's, just 10 hours of playtime with the light on, or 18 with it off. The Game Boy Advance SP's marketing in 2003 took a controversial direction in the UK market. Nintendo ran what they described as a tongue-in-cheek campaign explicitly targeting adult males. Billboards and magazine spreads in publications like FHM, The Face, and Maxim carried the tagline "For Men" beneath images of the Game Boy SP. Another advertisement showed a young man playing the device in bed next to a sleeping woman with the slogan, "The second best thing to do in the dark," highlighting the backlit screen feature but also clearly positioning the product for an adult male demographic. Nintendo's marketing was clearly geared toward guys, which didn't really match up with who was actually playing. By 1995, 46% of Game Boy players were female, a way bigger percentage than on home consoles like the NES or SNES. But instead of leaning into that, their marketing stayed super male-focused, potentially pushing away a big chunk of their audience. Sony, on the other hand, went in a totally different direction with its iToy campaign, featuring Grandma Dot Evens to make gaming feel more inviting to everyone. As Sony Europe's PR manager Jenny Kong put it, both marketing style and media exposure play a big part in the demographic of gamers, as I think female mass market needs encouragement through seeing other women playing games. The final iteration in the Game Boy line, the Game Boy Micro, arrived in 2005. Measuring just 4 inches wide, 2 inches tall, and weighing 80 grams, the Micro was designed as the ultimate portable Game Boy. It featured the sharpest screen of any Game Boy model but sacrificed backward compatibility with original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. With the Nintendo DS already on the market, the Micro failed to meet sales expectations, selling only 2.5 million units before being discontinued. As official support from Nintendo wound down, a vibrant homebrew community emerged around Game Boy systems. LSDJ became one of the most popular homebrew applications, transforming the Game Boy into a music creation tool. Released in 2000 by Johann Kotlinski, this tracker software utilized the Game Boy's sound chip to create electronic music, spawning an entire chiptune subgenre called Game Boy music. Artists worldwide adopted the Game Boy as a legitimate musical instrument, with some performing live shows using multiple Game Boys running LSDJ. The Game Boy camera, released in 1998, also found new life in the homebrew community. Though originally a simple digital camera with built-in minigames, hackers developed methods to extract images and create new applications for this accessory. Some photographers even embraced the camera's low-resolution aesthetic as an artistic medium. The Game Boy's simplicity and durability have made it an ideal platform for hardware mods. Creative enthusiasts have built Game Boys into everything from alarm clocks to robots, demonstrating the enduring appeal of this iconic piece of technology. One famous example, known as the Gulf War Game Boy, survived a bombing during Operation Desert Storm and still functions, now on display at Nintendo's New York store. In 2021, a sealed copy of the original Pokémon Red version sold at auction for $84,000. Demonstrating the continued value collectors place on Game Boy history. What began as a simple monochrome handheld has left an indelible mark on gaming history. What Gunpei Yokoi and his team created wasn't just a portable video game system, it was a revolution in how, where, and why we play games. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of this legendary console. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.